The year is 1770. Imperial Russia, ruled by Catherine the Great, stands at the precipice of a catastrophe. A microscopic enemy lurks in the shadows, the Black Death, a terrifying specter from the medieval past. Brought in from the Russo-Turkish War, the bubonic plague silently infiltrated Moscow. The plague, carried by fleas on rodents, thrived in the unsanitary conditions of 18th century Moscow. As the first victims succumbed to the plague's gruesome symptoms, fear began its insidious spread through the city. Few knew then that this outbreak, later known as the Plague Riot, would become one of the deadliest epidemics in Russian history. The Russo-Turkish War provided the perfect conduit for the plague to travel from the Ottoman Empire to Russian soil. Soldiers, often carrying fleas on their bodies and rats in their provisions, became unwitting vectors. As Russian soldiers laid siege to Ottoman fortresses, they encountered a foe more insidious than any army, the plague. Victorious troops returning from the front lines carried the plague with them, spreading it to towns and villages. By late 1770, the plague had reached Moscow, a bustling metropolis of over 200,000 inhabitants. The city's crowded conditions and poor sanitation created a fertile ground for the disease. Panic set in as people realized the invisible enemy in their midst was no ordinary illness. It was the Black Death. The plague's arrival in Moscow transformed the city into a scene of unimaginable suffering. Hospitals overflowed with the sick and dying, their anguished cries echoing through the deserted streets. As fear gripped the city, social order began to unravel. People, desperate to escape the contagion, abandoned their homes and fled, spreading the disease further. The city's infrastructure crumbled under the weight of the epidemic. With death claiming thousands each day, mass graves became a grim necessity. Fear permeated every aspect of life in Moscow. Rumors and superstitions flourished as people sought explanations and remedies. Some turned to traditional cures, while others sought solace in religion, crowding into churches to pray for deliverance. The church played a complex role during the epidemic, with some priests ministering to the sick and others attributing the plague to God's wrath. This mix of fear and religious fervor sometimes erupted in violence. Desperate crowds targeted those they perceived as responsible for the plague, foreigners, the poor, and even doctors. These riots only exacerbated the crisis, hindering efforts to combat the epidemic. The Russian government, under Catherine the Great's leadership, implemented desperate measures to halt the plague's spread. Cordons were established around infected areas, restricting travel and isolating the sick. Houses where plague victims were found were sealed, entombing the living alongside the dead. These measures incited further panic and unrest, leading to food shortages and economic hardship. The sight of corpses littering the streets became a chilling testament to the authorities' struggle. Archbishop Ambrosius, initially supportive of government measures, later clashed with authorities by refusing to close churches. His defiance undermined public health efforts and contributed to the chaos. The plague riot erupted in September 1771, fueled by anger, fear, and distrust of the authorities. The Moscow plague of 1770 to 1772 eventually subsided, leaving a trail of devastation. The official death toll was estimated at over 50,000 in Moscow alone. The economic, social, and psychological scars of the epidemic ran deep, shaping the city and the nation for years. Catherine the Great implemented reforms aimed at improving public health and preventing future outbreaks. These included establishing quarantine facilities, improving sanitation, and reorganizing the medical system. However, many of these reforms proved short-lived. The epidemic exposed deep inequalities and social tensions, fueling resentment toward the ruling class. The Moscow plague stands as a stark reminder of the devastating power of infectious diseases and the importance of public health measures.